They say the third time is the charm, but for me, the third time was a death sentence. I stood in the shadows of the moonlight gala, watching my younger sister, Alice, shift into a perfect golden wolf. I watched my father smile at her with the pride he never showed me. And then I watched him turn to me with eyes cold as ice. "You are broken," he said. "You are a stain on this family." I wasn't just rejected, I was erased. Thrown into the frozen wastes with nothing but a thin coat and a shattered heart, left to be eaten by rogues. I prayed for death, but death didn't answer. The monster did. Alpha Kendrick Draven, the wolf eater, the beast who slaughters armies for sport. My family thought they were throwing away a piece of trash. They didn't realize they were hand-delivering the most dangerous alpha in the world, his greatest weapon. He didn't look at me and see a failure. He looked at me, covered in snow and blood, and he growled one word that changed the fate of nations. Mine. Chapter 1. The Third Year of Silence. The Moonlight Gala was meant to be a celebration of life, fertility, and the eternal bond of the wolf. But to Astrid Vance, the music drifting through the grand ballroom sounded like a funeral dirge. She stood in the shadows of a massive marble pillar, clutching a glass of sparkling cider she had no intention of drinking. Her knuckles were white. Her breath came in shallow, terrified hitches. Tonight was the Winter Solstice. The night the moon was closest to the earth. The night wolves found their mates. For most young she-wolves, this was the highlight of their lives. For Astrid, it was a recurring nightmare. "Stand up straight," a sharp voice hissed from her left. Astrid flinched, straightening her spine instinctively. Her mother, Calliope Vance, stood beside her. Calliope was a woman carved from ice and expectations. She wore a gown of emerald silk that cost more than the yearly wages of the pack servants, and her eyes were currently scanning the room, ensuring no one was looking at her disappointment of a daughter. "You are blending into the curtains," Calliope muttered, adjusting the strap of Astrid's modest pale blue dress. It was a dress from 3 seasons ago. Why buy a new gown for a daughter who'd never produced results? "At least try to look available, Astrid. This is the 3rd year. If you do not shift tonight, if you do not find a mate..." "I know, Mother," Astrid whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you?" Calliope sneered softly. "Your father is losing patience. The beta bloodline is strong. You are making us look weak." Astrid swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to scream that she didn't choose this. She didn't choose to be 21 years old and stuck in a human skin that felt too tight. She didn't choose the silence in her head where a wolf should be. "Oh, look at her!" The tone of Calliope's voice shifted instantly from disdain to adoration. Astrid looked toward the center of the room. Alice Vance had arrived. Astrid's younger sister was 18 today. It was her first gala, and she was breathtaking. Alice wore a gown of shimmering gold that hugged her curves, catching the light of the chandeliers. Her hair was a cascade of honey blonde waves, and her skin glowed with the vitality of a wolf on the brink of its first shift. She walked with a natural, predatory grace that Astrid had never possessed. The crowd parted for her. Alpha heirs from neighboring packs turned their heads, scenting the air. Alice smelled like fresh rain and ambition. Astrid smelled like nothing, just soap and anxiety. Alice spotted us and glided over, a beaming smile on her face. She didn't look nervous. She looked triumphant. "Mother," she squealed, accepting Calliope's embrace. "Can you feel it? The moon. It feels like my skin is buzzing." "That is your wolf, my darling. She is ready to greet the world." Alice turned to Astrid, her smile dimmed slightly, replaced with a pitying look that hurt worse than a slap. "Hi, Astrid," Alice said, smoothing her expensive dress. "Are you feeling anything tonight?" "Not yet," Astrid lied, looking at the floor. "Oh, well, don't worry. Even if you don't shift, maybe a lower-ranking wolf will take pity on you. Maybe a delta?" It was a backhanded compliment wrapped in sugar. "Girls!" a booming voice interrupted them. James Vance, the pack beta, approached. He was a large, imposing man who wore his rank like a weapon. He kissed Alice on the forehead, beaming with pride. "You look like a Luna, Alice," James declared loud enough for the nearby alphas to hear. "Truly magnificent." Then he turned to Astrid. The light in his eyes died instantly. "Don't embarrass us tonight, Astrid. Stay in the back. Let your sister shine." "Yes, father," Astrid whispered. Boom! The clock tower struck midnight. The skylights of the ballroom opened, allowing the full silver light of the winter moon to flood the dance floor. A collective gasp went through the room. The energy shifted. It was primal. It was heavy. Alice gasped, clutching her chest. Her eyes flashed a brilliant, glowing gold. The sound of bones cracking, a sickening, beautiful sound echoed in the silence. "It's happening!" Alice cried out, joy radiating from her. Around the room, other 18-year-olds fell to their knees, their bodies contorting as their wolves tore free for the first time. Astrid stood frozen. She closed her eyes. She prayed to the moon goddess. "Please, just a spark, just a whisper. Don't let me be empty." She waited. She felt the cold draft from the open skylight. She felt the vibration of the floor as wolves landed on their paws. She felt terror clawing at her throat. But inside, nothing. Silence. She opened her eyes. In the center of the room, where Alice had been standing, stood a magnificent golden-furred wolf. It threw his head back and howled, a sound of pure power and acceptance. The crowd erupted in cheers. "A golden wolf!" someone shouted. "A rarity!" James and Calliope were weeping with joy, rushing towards the golden wolf. And Astrid stood alone, in the shadow of the pillar, a human girl in a room of monsters, realizing with a crushing certainty that her life was over. Chapter 2. The Walk of Shame. The cheers for Alice were deafening, shaking the crystal chandeliers overhead. But as Astrid peeled herself away from the safety of the marble pillar to make her exit, the room seemed to quiet around her, not out of respect, but out of disdain. She had to cross the entire length of the ballroom to reach the doors. It felt like walking across a field of broken glass. "Look," a hushed voice whispered, loud enough to cut through the music. "There goes the shadow." 3 years, another voice scoffed. It was Sarah, a Delta female Astrid had gone to school with. Sarah clinked her glass against her mate's. "I honestly don't know why Beta James keeps her around. It's cruel, really, like keeping a bird with broken wings." Astrid kept her head down, staring at the polished toes of her shoes. "Just keep walking," she told herself. "Don't cry, not here." But the pack was merciless. The adrenaline of the solstice had made them bold, and seeing the golden wolf Alice rise made Astrid's failure look even more pathetic by comparison. A young male shoulder-checked her as he rushed past to get a closer look at Alice. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look back. To him, she was as substantial as air. "Watch it, Null," a muttered. "No." The slur stung her eyes with hot tears. "She should have been drowned at birth," an elder murmured to his wife as Astrid passed their table. The words hit her like physical blows. A beta line needs strength. She is nothing but empty space. Astrid bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. A sob threatened to claw its way up her throat, a jagged, painful thing. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle it. Hurrying her pace, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, pitying, disgusted, amused, boring into her back. By the time she pushed through the heavy oak doors and out into the freezing night air, her composure shattered. She collapsed against the stone wall of the portico, gasping for air and the tears finally spilling over. They were hot and humiliating, freezing instantly on her cheeks. She wasn't just unchosen. She was unwanted, a mistake in the genetic code of a proud family. "Astrid!" Her father's voice cracked like a whip. James Vance stood by the family carriage, holding the door open. He wasn't looking at her with concern. He was looking at his watch. "Get in," he hissed, his face flush with the embarrassment of having to wait for his failure of a daughter, while the rest of the pack celebrated his success of a daughter. Astrid wiped her face frantically, scrambling into the carriage. The ride back to the Vance estate was suffocating. Alice sat on the plush velvet seat across from her, still flush with the afterglow of her first shift. She wasn't just a golden wolf, she had been claimed. In the chaos of the gala, Lucas, the future alpha of the River Run pack, had stepped forward and he had wrapped his arm around Alice's waist and declared her his mate. The Vances had secured their legacy. They were practically royalty now, except for the stain sitting in the corner. Astrid stared out the window at the passing snow-covered trees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She tried to make herself as small as possible, to disappear into the upholstery. When they arrived at the estate, the celebration ended abruptly at the front door. "Alice, go to your room," James commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Prepare for tomorrow. You will be moving into the Alpha's quarters." Alice looked at Astrid, a flicker of something, pity, triumph, crossing her face. She didn't say a word. She gathered her golden skirts and hurried up the stairs, leaving her sister to the wolves. "Into the study," James barked at Astrid. Astrid's legs felt like lead. She walked into the mahogany-paneled room that smelled of old paper and harsh judgment. Her mother calligraphy followed, closing the heavy double doors with a finality that made Astrid jump. James didn't sit behind his desk. He paced, his beta aura flaring in waves of suffocating heat. He looked at Astrid as if she were a disease he had failed to cure. 3 years, James said softly, which was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. 3 years, Astrid. I have made excuses, I have bribed healers, and for 3 years you have humiliated me. "I didn't ask to be this way," Astrid whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "It doesn't matter what you asked for," James roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. "It matters what you are. You are a hollow, a genetic dead end. And now with Alice mated to the future alpha, do you have any idea how you look? You are a liability." He turned to Calliope. "Tell her." Calliope stood by the fireplace, refusing to look at Astrid. The alpha expressed concern, she said coldly. He does not want a broken bloodline so close to his son's mate. "We cannot have you here, Astrid," James declared, his eyes void of love. "You are a weed in a garden of roses." He straightened his posture, invoking the formal rite. I, James Vance, beta of the River Run Pack, reject you as my daughter. I strip you of the Vance name. I sever the blood tie. A sharp physical pain ripped through Astrid's chest. It felt like a hook had been yanked out of her heart. She screamed, falling to her knees as the magical bond to her family shattered. You are a rogue, James spat. You have 1 hour to leave these lands. If the sentries find you after midnight, they have orders to kill on sight. Calliope finally looked at her. She threw a thin wool cloak on the floor in front of her. Go, her mother said, and do not look back. Astrid grabbed the cloak with shaking hands. She stood up and looked at the parents who had just sentenced her to death. She found no regret in their eyes. She turned and walked out the front door into the biting wind of the worst winter of a decade. Behind her, the lock clicked shut. Chapter 3. The White Tomb. The frozen wastes earned their name not just from the ice, but from the silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that swallowed hope. It had been 3 days since the heavy oak door of the Vance estate had clicked shut, sealing Astrid out of her life. 3 days of walking through a world stripped of color and mercy. The thin wool cloak her mother had thrown at her, a final pathetic gesture of charity, was now stiff with frost, offering as much warmth as a sheet of paper against a hurricane. Astrid stumbled, her boots catching on a buried root hidden beneath the snow. She fell hard, the impact jarring her frozen bones. The snow didn't feel soft. It felt like concrete covered in crushed glass. She didn't try to get up immediately. She just laid there, face pressed against the ice, staring across the gray, churning landscape. It would be so easy, a seductive voice whispered in the back of her mind. Just close your eyes. It's like falling asleep. Hypothermia was a cruel liar. It promised warmth right before it stopped your heart. Astrid curled into a tight ball, trying to preserve the last flickering ember of heat in her core. The physical pain was agonizing. Her fingers were numb, turning waxy blue, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. But the spiritual pain was a different kind of torture. The severance of the pack bond had left a gaping, ragged hole in her chest. For 21 years, she had felt the low background hum of the River Run Pack in her mind. It was a subconscious web of connection. Her father's stern presence, her mother's anxiety, the collective heartbeat of her people. Now, the web was cut. She was untethered. She was spiritually amputated, a ghost haunting a graveyard of snow. She thought of Alice. Right now, her sister was likely sitting by a roaring hearth in the Alpha's quarters, wrapped in thick furs, feeding her new mate grapes. She would be surrounded by warmth, adoration, and the intoxicating buzz of a fresh mating bond. Alice wouldn't be thinking of Astrid. Alice erased her the moment she shifted into that golden wolf. You are a weed, her father's voice echoed in the wind, louder than the storm. A stain. Astrid forced herself to sit up, a sob tearing from her throat. A spark of defiance, small but hot, flared in her chest. I am not a weed, she croaked, her voice barely a whisper against the gale. I am Astrid. She forced her legs to move. Her feet were raw, bleeding inside her boots. But she crawled toward a cluster of twisted black pine trees, seeking shelter. She huddled into the hollow of a massive dead trunk, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to disappear from the wind. She was hungry. A gnawing, violent hunger that made her stomach cramp. But there's nothing here. No prey she could catch without a wolf. No berries. Only ice and the endless gray. She closed her eyes, her head lolling back against the rough bark. The darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, soft and inviting. Just for a minute, she promised herself, her thoughts growing sluggish. I'll just rest for a minute. But as she drifted toward the void, the wind shifted. It brought a scent that cut through the sterile cold air like a rusty, serrated knife. It wasn't the clean smell of pine or snow. It was the smell of wet fur, rotting meat, and madness. Astrid snapped her eyes open. The hair on her arms stood up, not from the cold, but from a primal instinct she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't alone, and whatever was out there, it was hunting. Chapter 4. The Circle of Teeth. The growl came from everywhere and nowhere. Astrid pressed herself deeper into the tree hollow, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held her breath, praying the wind would mask her scent. But she was human. She smelled of fear, blood, and vulnerability. To a rogue, she smelled like dinner. A shadow detached itself from the storm. A wolf, gaunt and mangy, stepped into the clearing. Its fur was matted with filth, its eyes glowing a sickly, feverish yellow. It wasn't a noble creature like the wolves of the River Run pack. This was a thing driven mad by isolation and hunger. It sniffed the air, its upper lip curling to reveal yellowed, broken fangs. Then another shadow appeared, and another. 3 of them. Astrid let out a small, involuntary whimper. The lead wolf's head snapped toward her. It let out a bark that sounded like a laugh. "Human?" The rogue's mind voice projected, messy and jagged. It wasn't a clear link, just a projection of intent. "Weak meat." Astrid scrambled to stand, her bark hitting the wood. "Stay back!" she screamed, reaching into her boot for the small, dull knife she had managed to steal from the kitchen before leaving. It was a butter knife. Useless. The wolves circled her. They weren't in a rush. They enjoyed the fear. It seasoned the meat. The lead wolf lunged. Astrid scuddened, shashing out with the knife. She got lucky. The blade caught the wolf's nose. It yelped, jumping back, shaking its head. Drops of black blood hit the snow. The pain didn't scare it. It angered it. The wolf snarled, crouching low, its muscles bunching for a killing leap. The other 2 moved in from the sides, cutting off her escape. This was it. This was how the Unchosen died. Not with dignity, but as a meal for the damned. Astrid closed her eyes, tears freezing on her lashes. She thought of her mother. "Calliope, you got your wish. The weed is being pulled." The lead wolf sprang. Astrid braced for the tearing of teeth, but the teeth never touched her. Instead, the earth shook. A roar shattered the air, a sound so deep, so resonant, and so terrifyingly powerful that it vibrated through the marrow of Astrid's bones. It wasn't a wolf howl. It was the roar of a monster. A massive black blur slammed into the rogue mid-air. There was a sickening crunch of bone, a wet tear, and the rogue was thrown 50 feet into a tree, dead before it hit the bark. The other 2 rogues froze, whimpering, pressing their belly to the snow in abject submission. Standing over the broken body of the leader was a beast. He was twice the size of any alpha wolf Astrid had ever seen. His fur was as black as the void between stars. His claws were the length of daggers. But it was his aura that made the air heavy. It was suffocating. It tasted of iron, an ancient, unstoppable violence. The beast turned its massive head. Burning red eyes locked on to the remaining rogues. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply exhaled. And the rogues ran. They scrambled over each other to escape, fleeing into the dark, terrified of the apex predator that had just arrived. Astrid slid down the tree trunk, her legs giving out. She looked up at the black monster. He shifted. Chapter 5. The Silence. The sound of bones snapping and reshaping was usually gruesome, but he did it with a fluid, practiced grace. The massive black wolf stood on its hind legs, fur receding, muscles knitting together to form the shape of a man. He was huge. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight. He was naked, unbothered by the freezing wind or the snow biting at his skin. His body was a landscape of scars, claw marks, burns, and old battles etched into his olive skin like a map of violence. His hair was dark, hanging in wet strands over his face, but it was his eyes that held Astrid captive. They were the color of obsidian, hard, endless, and burning with a residual red madness. Alpha Kendrick Draven, the wolf eater. He turned his gaze to her. Astrid couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She stared up at death incarnate, waiting for him to finish what the rogues had started. He was known to kill trespassers on sight. Kendrick stalked toward her. The snow hissed beneath his bare feet, melting from his unnatural body heat. He stopped inches from her, his shadow engulfing her completely. He looked enraged. His jaw was clenched tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked like a man holding back a scream. The voices, Astrid realized, remembering the terrifying legends. He hears everything. He is mad. "Who sent you?" Kendrick rasped. His voice was a deep, grinding rumble that vibrated in her chest. "Are you a spy? A distraction?" "No, I am no one. I was exiled." Kendrick narrowed his eyes. He leaned down, invading her space. He grabbed a handful of her thin cloak, hauling her up to her feet so she was pressed against his bare, burning chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck and inhaled deeply. He was checking her scent for lies, for pack allegiance. Astrid flinched, expecting him to recoil from her scentless, hollow nature. Kendrick froze. His entire massive body went rigid against hers. For 10 years, Kendrick's mind had been a hurricane, a constant screaming cacophony of 1,000 wolves' thoughts, fears, and desires. It was a noise that never slept. It was the reason he was called a monster. The pain made him feral. But the moment his nose touched her skin, the noise stopped. It cut out, like a candle snuffed in a vacuum. Silence. Beautiful, heavy, absolute silence. Kendrick gasped. A sound of pure shock. His grip on her cloak loosened, his hands flattening against her back to pull her closer, desperate to keep the contact. He dragged in another breath of her scent. Winter, starlight, and quiet. The red haze in his eyes cleared, revealing a stunned, desperate clarity. Astrid trembled in his arms. "Please," she sobbed quietly, "just kill me quickly." Kendrick pulled back slightly, looking down at her face. He looked at her tear-streaked cheeks, her blue lips, the utter defeat in her eyes. He didn't see a spy. He didn't see a rogue. He saw the only thing that had ever made the pain stop. He brushed a thumb over her frozen cheek. His touch was calloused and rough, but shockingly gentle. "Kill you?" Kendrick rumbled, his voice sounding wonderstruck. "Little ghost, I would burn the world before I let anything hurt you." He scooped her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest to share his heat. "You were thrown away as trash, but to me, you are the cure. Mine," he whispered to the wind. "Mine." Chapter 6. The Golden Cage. Astrid woke up to warmth. It was a sensation so foreign to her that she panicked, thrashing against the softness that engulfed her. She wasn't in the snow. She wasn't being eaten by rogues. She was drowning in furs, sable, mink, wolf, piled high on a bed large enough to sleep 5 people. She bolted upright, her heart racing. The room was massive, carved from the black stone of the mountain, but softened with tapestries of deep crimson and gold. A fireplace roared on the far wall, heating the room to a balmy temperature. "Peace, little ghost." The voice came from the shadows near the balcony. Alpha Kendrick sat in a massive iron chair. He was wearing loose trousers now, but his chest remained bare, the scars flickering in the firelight. He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Where am I?" Astrid whispered, clutching the furs to her chest to cover her tattered dress. The Iron Citadel, Kendrick rumbled. My home. And now, yours. He stood up. The sheer size of him sucked the air out of the room. He walked toward the bed. Astrid flinched, scuttling backward until her back hit the headboard. Kendrick stopped instantly. A flash of pain crossed his obsidian eyes. I will not hurt you, he said, his voice dropping to a soothing deep purr. You are safe here. No one will touch you. No one will reject you. Why? Astrid asked, her voice trembling. I am wolfless. I am broken. My father said I was a weed. Why did you save me? Kendrick reached the edge of the bed. He knelt. The wolf-eater, the monster of legends, knelt on the stone floor so he was lower than her. Because when I am near you, the screaming stops, he whispered, reaching out a hand but stopping inches from her knee. Astrid looked at him confused. Screaming? My mind, Kendrick confessed, tapping his temple. I hear them all. Every wolf in my legion. Their rage, their hunger, their pain. It never stops. It drives us mad. It is the curse of the Silver-Fang lion. He looked at her with raw, naked vulnerability. But you are silent. You are the eye of the storm. When I hold you, the world is quiet. He looked at his hand, hovering near her. He was shaking. He was touch-starved, desperate for the relief she provided. Astrid felt a tug in her chest. Not fear, but empathy. She knew what it was like to be tormented by her own mind. She knew what it was like to be lonely. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out. She placed her small, pale hand on top of his massive, scarred one. Kendrick let out a shuddering breath, his eyes rolling back in his head as the tension drained from his massive frame. He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers, gripping her like a lifeline. The heat of his skin was intoxicating. Don't leave, he begged, pressing his forehead against their joined hands. Ask for anything. Jewels, silk, the heads of your enemies. I will give you the world. Just don't leave me in the noise. Astrid looked at the fearsome Alpha bowing to her, and for the first time in 21 years, she didn't feel like a weed. She felt like a root that had finally found water. I won't leave. Chapter 7. The Spirit Walker. A month passed within the black stone walls of the Iron Citadel. To Astrid's shock, it wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. The wolves of the Silver-Fang Legion, outcasts, rogues, and scarred warriors who had been rejected by society, did not treat her like a weed. They treated her like a deity. When she walked the drafty corridors wrapped in Kendrick's heavy furs, seasoned killers would stop and bow. They didn't bow because she was their alpha's mate. They bowed because when she was near, the crushing rage of the void that plagued the Legion seemed to settle. She was a walking calm in a castle of storms. But Astrid felt restless. It wasn't anxiety, it was a physical sensation, a low vibrating hum beneath her skin like a wire pulling tight. One afternoon, she stood on the balcony overlooking the training courtyard. Below, warriors sparred with steel and claw, their breaths misting in the cold mountain air. You are glowing. Astrid jumped as warm, heavy arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Kendrick. He rested his chin on the top of her head, pulling her back against his massive chest. He was always touching her now. If he wasn't holding her hand, he was touching her shoulder, her hair, her hip. He drank her silence like water. I feel strange, Astrid admitted, leaning into his heat. My skin feels too tight, like there is something inside trying to get out, but it doesn't know the door. Kendrick spun her around. He studied her face with his intense obsidian eyes. Your family said you were wolfless. They were blind fools. He took her hand and placed it flat against his chest, directly over the thundering beat of the monster who loved her. You are not empty, Astrid. You are overflowing. You just never had an anchor strong enough to hold the tether while you let go. I don't understand, she whispered. Close your eyes, Kendrick commanded softly. His voice was a hypnotic purr. Don't reach for a wolf. Don't try to break your bones and shift your skin. Reach for the spirit. Astrid hesitated, fear fluttering in her stomach. What if there's nothing there? What if I really am hollow? Then I will fill you, Kendrick vowed fiercely. Now, close your eyes, listen to my heart, and push. Astrid closed her eyes. She focused on the heat of his skin. She focused on the steady thud, thud, thud of the monster who loved her. She stopped trying to be a wolf. She just let go. And then she pushed. She didn't shift. There was no pain, no cracking bones. Instead, she felt herself expand. A wave of translucent, blinding silver energy erupted from her body. It poured out of her like a breaking dam. The energy swirled around them, coalescing into a shape. It formed a massive, ethereal wolf, twice the size of Kendrick's beast form. It wasn't made of flesh and fur. It was made of starlight and soul. The spirit wolf threw back its head and let out a silent howl. The sound didn't hit the ears. It hit the soul. Every wolf in the courtyard froze. The sparring stopped. The anger, the pain, the trauma of the outcast legion. For one heartbeat, it was washed away by a wave of pure peace. Astrid opened her eyes, gasping for air. The spirit wolf faded, dissolving back into her skin like mist. Kendrick was staring at her. The wolf eater, the man who feared nothing, looked awestruck. A spirit walker, he breathed. The legends are true. Why was that? Astrid asked, her knees trembling. Kendrick caught her, holding her upright. It means you don't just shift your body, Astrid. You project your soul. You can walk in dreams. You can heal minds. You can crush a warrior's will without ever lifting a finger. He laughed, a dark, triumphant sound that echoed off the walls. Your family threw away a goddess because he wanted a pet dog. Just then, the heavy iron doors of the courtyard banged open. A sentry ran in, panting heavily, looking terrified. Alpha, the sentry gasped, skidding to a halt before them. Messengers at the southern border. Astrid stiffened. Kendrick's aura instantly shifted from awe to violence. The protective beast surfaced, his eyes flashing red. Who? Kendrick snarled. The River Run Pack. They say their land is dying. They say the rot has taken the crops and the pups. They're begging for an audience with the healer of the Iron Citadel. Kendrick looked down at Astrid. His jaw set. He knew what was at stake. They don't know it's you, he said quietly. Astrid felt a cold resolve settle in her stomach. The fear of the girl who was thrown into the snow was gone. In its place was the icy clarity of a queen who had just found her crown. Let them come, she said softly. It is time they met the daughter they killed. Chapter 8. The Storm and the Surrender. The messengers from River Run had been sent to the guest quarters to wait. Kendrick had ordered the gates sealed for the night. He would not let the ghosts of Astrid's past ruin the revelation of her power. That night, the air in the royal chambers was thick enough to taste. Outside, a mountain storm raged, battering the black stone walls with snow and wind. Inside, the fire roared in the hearth, but the real heat came from the man pacing the floor. Kendrick was restless. Seeing Astrid summon the spirit wolf had done something to him. The beast beneath his skin was prowling, agitated, overwhelmed by the scent of her power. Astrid sat on the edge of the massive bed, watching him. She felt different, too. The emptiness that had defined her life was gone, filled with a humming, vibrant energy. She felt alive, and she felt hungry. "Kendrick," she whispered. He stopped pacing. He turned to her, his obsidian eyes burning with a raw, predatory need that stole her breath. "Go to sleep, Astrid," he rasped, his voice tight. "If I come closer, I do not think I can stop." "I don't want you to stop," she said. The confession hung in the air between them. Astrid stood up. Her legs were steady. She walked across the furs, closing the distance between them. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his bare, scarred chest. The silence crashed into his mind instantly. His shoulders dropped, his eyes rolled back as the relief washed over him. "You are my quiet," he groaned, covering her hand with his own. "My sanctuary." "And you are my anchor," she replied. She stepped closer, pressing her body against him. The heat radiating off of him was intoxicating. She reached up and brushed her thumb over his bottom lip. "Claim me, Kendrick. Not because you saved me. Not because of the silence. Claim me because you want me." Kendrick let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated against her ribs. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her to the bed, not as a fragile thing to be protected, but as a treasure to be devoured. He laid her down on the furs. He hovered over her, his massive frame blocking out the firelight. He looked at her with a worshipful hunger. "I have wanted you since the moment I found you in the snow. I have wanted you every second of every day. You are in my blood, Astrid. You are the air in my lungs." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was a storm meeting a mountain. He kissed her with 10 years of pent-up madness and desire, claiming her mouth, her breath, her soul. Astrid wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him deeper. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the girl who wasn't enough. She was everything. She was the only thing that mattered to the most powerful creature on Earth. Clothes were discarded in a frenzy of need. Skin met skin, his burning hot, hers cool and soft. When he finally claimed her, joining their bodies, a shock wave of energy pulsed through the room, rattling the windows. It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The void in Kendrick's mind didn't just go silent, it filled with light. And the lonely hollow in Astrid's heart filled with his strength. "Mine!" he roared against her neck, marking her soul. "Yours!" she gasped, arching into him. That night, the wolf-eater did not dream of war. He dreamed of winter and starlight, wrapped in the arms of the woman who had tamed him. Chapter 9. The Rot. While passion burned in the Iron Citadel, the River Run pack was drowning in decay. Alice Vance stood on the balcony of the Alpha's manor, looking out over the territory she was supposed to rule. It was a nightmare. The lush green forests of the River Run Valley had turned a sickly gray. The trees were shedding their bark like dead skin. The river, usually sparkling and full of fish, was choked with sludge. The rot, the elders called it, a spiritual sickness that struck when the land rejected its leaders. Alice gripped the railing, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wood. She was the golden wolf. She was the prize. She shifted on her 18th birthday and mated the future Alpha immediately. She had done everything right. So why was everything going wrong? Alice. She turned. Lucas, her mate, and the pack Alpha stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted. His skin was sallow, his eyes dark with worry. The bond between them, which had felt so electric at the gala, now felt strained and thin. The healers say 3 more pups died this morning, Lucas said, his voice hollow. The mothers are drying up. There is no milk. The livestock are birthing stillborns. Alice felt a spike of panic. What are you saying? I'm saying the land is dying, Alice, Lucas snapped, his temper fraying. The pack is blaming us. They say the spirits have abandoned us. They haven't abandoned us, Alice insisted, though her voice wavered. We are the chosen line. I am the golden wolf. Gold doesn't grow corn, Alice, Lucas spat, and it doesn't cure the rot. The door to the balcony opened again. James and Calliope Vance entered. They looked older. The arrogance that usually defined James was replaced by a frantic, sweaty desperation. We have news. James held up a crumpled piece of parchment. The scouts returned from the border. And, Alice asked, the messengers reached the Iron Citadel. They were granted an audience, but not with Alpha Kendrick. With who? Lucas asked. With the Lady of the Silver Fang, Calliope whispered, her face pale. The soldiers say there is a woman there, a spirit walker. They say she walks through the halls to the madness calms. They say she glows like moonlight. Alice frowned. A spirit walker? Those are myths. They say she has healed their wounded with a touch. If anyone can cure the rot, it is her. Then we go to her, Alice said, lifting her chin. We offer her gold. We offer her an alliance. She will help us. Who could refuse the River Run pack? James looked at his daughter. He looked at the dying land behind her. He didn't tell her the rest of the rumor. He didn't tell her that the Lady of the Silver Fang was described as having pale skin and eyes the color of a winter storm. He didn't want to believe it. We leave at dawn, James decided. Pack your finest clothes. We must look like kings, not beggars. Alice nodded, smoothing her silk dress. She would go to this lady. She would charm her. She would get what she wanted. She always did. She didn't know she was marching toward her own reckoning. She didn't know that the sister she had erased was waiting for her on a throne of iron. Chapter 10. The Beggars in Silk. The journey to the Silverfang territory was a descent into a frozen hell. As the Vance family carriage crossed the border from the river-run lands into the mountains, the landscape shifted violently. The rotting gray forests gave way to jagged peaks of black rock in eternal snow. The wind howled against the carriage walls, shaking the frame, a constant reminder that they were entering a land where survival was earned, not given. Inside the carriage, the mood was tense. Alice sat huddled in her mink furs, shivering. She had dressed to impress, a gown of crimson velvet, gold jewelry, and her hair pinned in an elaborate updo. She looked like a jewel, but in this harsh landscape, she just looked fragile. "Why is it so cold?" Alice complained, rubbing her arms. "How can anyone live here? It's barbaric." "They are outcasts, Alice," James said dismissively, though he kept glancing out the window with unease. "They are savages who couldn't fit into civilized packs. We will offer them gold, get the healer to perform the ritual, and leave immediately." "Do you think she will come back with us?" Calliope asked. Her voice was quiet, her eyes fixed on her hands. "The healer. If she is as powerful as they say." "Everyone has a price," James stated, adjusting his cravat. "We are the river-run cack. We are nobility. This lady is likely some hedge witch living in a cave. She will be honored to serve us." The carriage crested a ridge, and the Iron Citadel came into view. Alice gasped. It wasn't a cave. It was a fortress carved directly from the living rock of the mountain. Spires of black iron pierced the clouds. The walls were 50 feet high, manned by warriors who looked more like bears than wolves. It radiated power, dark, ancient, and impenetrable. That? Lucas, who had ridden beside the carriage on horseback, pulled up to the window. He looked pale. "That is where the wolf-eater lives." They approached the massive gates. They didn't open immediately. A sentry stood atop the wall. He was shirtless, despite the freezing wind, his body covered in blue war paint. "State your business," the sentry bellowed. "I am Beta James Vance of River Run. We are here to see the Lady of the Silver Fang. We have an appointment." The sentry looked down at them. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He looked at the fancy carriage and the shivering horses with open contempt. "Open the gates," the sentry yelled behind him. "The beggars have arrived." Beggars? Alice bristled at the insult. She was a Luna. She was golden. She wasn't a beggar. The gates groaned open. They rode into the courtyard. It was filled with the Silver Fang Legion, hundreds of wolves. They stopped their training to watch the carriage roll in. Their eyes were hard, assessing, and dangerous. James stepped out of the carriage, helping Calliope and Alice down. Alice tried to hold her head high, but the sheer size of the warriors around her made her feel small. These weren't the polite, political wolves of the South. These were killers. "This way," a gruff guard grunted, gesturing toward the main keep. "The Alpha and the Lady are waiting." They were led through the massive stone corridors. It was dark, only lit by torches. The air smelled of pine, steel, and something familiar. Calliope stopped for a second and sniffed the air. "What is it, Mother?" Alice asked. "That scent," Calliope whispered, a frown creasing her forehead. "It smells like winter and starlight." "It's just the cold, Mother," Alice said impatiently. "Come on, I want to get this over with." They reached the double doors of the great hall. The guards pushed them open. "Enter!" a deep voice boomed from inside. James straightened his coat. Alice put on their best, most charming smile. They walked in, prepared to dazzle a savage warlord and his witch with their sophistication. They walked into the hall, and their world stopped. Chapter 11. The Reflection of Shame. The great hall of the Iron Citadel was a cavern of shadows and flickering torchlight, dominated by a throne of twisted black steel. Sitting on that throne was Alpha Kendrick Draven. He was terrifying, a mountain of muscle and scars, watching them with eyes that burned like coals. The void aura around him was so heavy it made the air hard to breathe. But the Vance family wasn't looking at him. They were looking at the woman sitting on the arm of his throne. She wore a gown of silver silk that flowed like liquid starlight around her legs. A collar of white fur rested on her shoulders, and a crown of woven iron and winter berries sat upon her pale hair. Her hand rested possessively on the Alpha's massive shoulder. It was Astrid, the girl they had thrown into the snow, the weed, the ghost. James Vance stopped walking so abruptly that Lucas bumped into him. Calliope let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Alice stared. Her golden eyes widened, darting from Astrid's crown to Kendrick's devoted gaze. The reality crashed into her vanity like a hammer. You're alive!" Alice whispered, her voice echoing in the silent hall. "I am," Astrid said. Her voice wasn't the whisper of the girl who hid in the kitchen. It was the calm, resonant tone of a queen. "Welcome to my home, sister." "This is a trick," James blustered, his face turning red. He looked at Kendrick. "Alpha Draven, why is my banished daughter sitting on your throne? Is she a servant?" Kendrick stood up. The movement was slow, predatory. He descended the dais steps, the sound of his boots heavy on the stone. He stopped inches from James, towering over the beta. "Servant?" Kendrick repeated, the word a low, dangerous rumble. "She is my mate. She is the Lady of the Silver Fang, and you will speak to her with respect, or I will tear your tongue from your head." James paled. Shrinking back, Alice stepped forward, her jealousy overriding her fear. She couldn't stand it. She was the golden wolf. She was the special one. Astrid was nothing. "Mate?" she scoffed, forcing a laugh. With her? She's wolfless, Alpha. She's empty. You must be mistaken. She can't give you strong pups. She can't even shift. Astrid stood up. She didn't walk down the steps. She floated. Spiritual energy around her hummed, visible to the naked eye as a faint silver mist. She stopped in front of Alice. Up close, the difference was brutal. Alice looked like a pretty girl in a costume. Astrid looked like a goddess carved from winter itself. I do not need to shift to be strong, Alice, Astrid said softly. I am the Luna of River Run, she snapped, her insecurity flaring. I saved the bloodline. You're just a reject who got lucky. Astrid looked at her sister. She saw the fear behind the arrogance. She saw the little girl who used to bully her just to feel big. You are a Luna of a dying land, Astrid corrected her. You have a golden coat, Alice, but your soul is rot. That is why the land rejects you. Astrid raised her hand. She didn't touch Alice. She simply pushed her aura outward. The pressure hit Alice like a physical wall. The golden wolf gasped, her knees buckling as she collapsed to the floor, bowed under the sheer weight of Astrid's spirit. Look at me, Astrid commanded. Alice looked up, tears of humiliation streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she felt small. You thought you were the sun, but you were just a candle, and I am the storm that blows you out. Chapter 12. The Audacity of Greed. The sight of the golden child on her knees broke James and Calliope. Stop! Calliope cried, rushing forward to kneel beside Alice. Astrid, please, she is your sister. Now she is my sister? Astrid asked, arching a brow. When I was freezing in the wastes, did she call me sister then? Or did she sit by the fire and laugh? Calliope looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. James, however, recovered his wits. He saw the power Astrid wielded. He saw the way the fearsome Alpha King looked at her, like he would burn the world if she asked. James didn't see a daughter. He saw an asset. He cleared his throat, stepping over his weeping younger daughter. Astrid, James said, putting on his beta voice. Reasonable, authoritative. We made mistakes. We admit that. Mistakes? Kendrick growled from behind Astrid, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. You attempted murder. It was a test, James lied quickly, his eyes desperate. We knew you were special, Astrid. We knew you had a destiny greater than River Run. We had to push you out of the nest so you could fly. And look at you now. You are magnificent. He opened his arms, smiling as he were a proud father. The prophecy is fulfilled, James declared grandly. You have found your power. Now you must come home. The River Run Parrot needs you. Your people need you. You can heal the rot, and then, well, we can discuss an alliance. Perhaps a marriage contract between our packs. He was trying to sell her. Again. He was trying to take credit for her survival and monetize her trauma. Astrid stared at him. She felt a cold, hard knot in her chest where her love for him used to be. You want me to come home? Astrid asked quietly. Yes, James nodded eagerly. We forgive you for running away. We will reinstate you. You will be a Vance again. I am not a Vance. I am a Draven. She turned to Kendrick. The rot. It is killing the pups? Yes, Kendrick said, his eyes hard. Innocents are dying for their sins. Astrid nodded. She walked past her father, ignoring his outstretched hands. She walked to the center of the room. She said, I will not come home. I will never step foot on your poisoned soil again. But the pack will die, Lucas cried out from the back, speaking for the first time. The pack is innocent, Astrid agreed, but you are not. She closed her eyes. She reached deep into the well of her spirit walker power, the reservoir of starlight and silence that Kendrick had helped her find. She didn't need to travel to River Run. She projected her spirit. A massive, translucent silver wolf erupted from her body, filling the great hall with blinding light. The spectral beast howled, and the sound carried across the miles, vibrating through the mountains, down into the valleys of the River Run. In the vision, Astrid saw the gray forests. She saw the sludge in the river, and she pushed. She sent a pulse of pure, cleansing life force into the earth. In the great hall, Astrid gasped, her knees giving way as the energy left her. Kendrick caught her instantly, holding her up, feeding her his strength. "It is done," Astrid whispered, leaning against his chest. "The rot is gone. The pups will live." James beamed. "Wonderful! You see, you are one of us. Now pack your things, daughter. We have much to discuss." Astrid opened her eyes. They were glowing violet. "I am not finished," she said. She looked at James, Calliope, and Alice. "I healed the land," Astrid said. "Now I must cut out the disease." She pointed a trembling finger at them. "You rejected me. You severed the bond." "We can fix that," James argued. "No," Astrid said. "I accept your rejection." The words slammed into them like a physical blow. The air in the room cracked. By accepting the rejection as a spirit walker, an alpha-tier being, she was making it permanent. She was erasing them from her soul. "I sever the tie," Astrid commanded. "You are strangers to me. You have no daughter named Astrid." Calliope screamed as she felt the last thread of connection snap. James fell to his knees, clutching his chest, gasping as the reflected pain of the severance hit him. Astrid looked down at them, cold and unreachable as the moon. "I order you to leave my territory. If I see you again, the wolf-eater will not be held back." Kendrick stepped forward, his fangs bared in a snarl that promised death. "Run." They ran. The golden wolf, the proud beta, and the cold mother scrambled out of the hall like frightened rats, fleeing the daughter they had thrown away. Astrid watched them go. She didn't cry. She felt light. She turned to Kendrick, burying her face in his neck. "I'm tired," she whispered. "I know," he murmured, lifting her into his arms. "Rest now, my queen. You are home." Chapter 13. The Morning After. The sun rose over the iron citadel, but for the first time in living memory, the light didn't seem cold. It reflected off the snow on the black peaks, turning the world into a canvas of blinding white and gold. Astrid stood on the highest rampart of the fortress, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak that smelled of cedar and alpha. She looked south, toward the pass where her family's carriage had disappeared the night before. "Do you regret it?" Kendrick stepped up beside her. He didn't wrap his arms around her this time. He stood shoulder to shoulder with her, an equal. His presence was a warm, solid wall against the wind. Astrid took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It no longer tasted of shame or waiting. "I thought I would," she admitted, looking at her hands. "I thought cutting them off would feel like dying. I thought I would feel empty." She looked up at him, her gray eyes clear. "But I don't feel empty, Kendrick. I feel light. I feel like I can finally breathe." Kendrick turned to her. He reached out and tucked a strand of her platinum hair behind her ear. His touch was reverent. "You broke the cycle, Astrid. You chose yourself. That is the hardest thing a wolf can do." Below them, in the courtyard, the Silver Fang Legion was gathering. Hundreds of warriors, wolves who had been burned, scarred, exiled, and forgotten, looked up at the rampart. They didn't see a weed. They saw the woman who had brought a titan to his knees and healed a dying land with a thought. "They are waiting for you," Kendrick said softly. "For you," Astrid corrected. "You are their alpha." "I am their general." He took her hand and raised it. "You are their queen." A roar went up from the courtyard. It wasn't a chaotic noise. It was a unified howl of loyalty. The Silver Fang, the Spirit Walker, the Queen. Astrid looked at the sea of faces. She realized then that family wasn't blood. Blood was just biology. Family were the people who stood by you when you were freezing in the snow. Family were the monsters who learned to be gentle just for you. She squeezed Kendrick's hand. "Let's go down," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "We have a kingdom to rule." Chapter 14, The White Wolf. Epilogue. 1 year later. The winter solstice had returned. The mountains were buried in deep drifts of snow, but the Iron Citadel was warm. Fireplaces roared in every hall, and the sound of laughter, once a stranger to these walls, echoed through the keep. Astrid stood in the snow of the private garden, wearing only a thin shift. "Astrid!" Kendrick called out from the balcony, panic edging his voice. "Get inside, you'll freeze!" He vaulted over the railing, landing in the snow beside her, ready to bundle her up. He was still the same protective, possessive beast he had always been. But Astrid pushed his hands away. She was laughing. "I'm not cold, Kendrick. I'm burning," she said, her breath misting in the air. Kendrick froze. He looked at her. Her skin wasn't pale with cold, it was flushed with heat. Her eyes were glowing a brilliant, incandescent violet. "It's time," she whispered. For a year, her spirit wolf had lived outside her body, a projection of magic. But now, with her heart whole, her trauma healed, and her place in the world secured, her biology was finally ready to catch up to her soul. She closed her eyes. She didn't have to push. She just let go. The sound of shifting bones filled the garden. Not a crack of pain, but a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake to reveal the water beneath. A flash of blinding white light engulfed her. When the light faded, a wolf stood in her place. She was magnificent. She was massive, her shoulder coming up to Kendrick's chest. Her fur was pure, unblemished white, softer than snow and brighter than the moon. Her eyes were violet stars. She yipped, pawing the ground playfully. Kendrick stared at her, tears shining in his obsidian eyes. The wolf eater fell to his knees in the snow. "Beautiful," he choked out. "Perfect!" Astrid didn't wait. She lunged, tackled him into a snowbank, licking his face. Kendrick laughed, a deep, joyous sound that shook the mountains. He shifted mid-laughter, his form dissolving into the massive black beast that had saved her life so long ago. The black wolf and the white wolf, the shadow and the starlight. They ran. They tore out of the garden, past the cheering guards, and out into the wild, open expanse of the frozen wastes. They ran not from fear, but for the sheer joy of freedom. Astrid Vance had been rejected, exiled, and left to die. She had been called a weed, a ghost, a nothing. But as she ran beside her mate, the king of the outcasts, beneath the light of the winter moon, she knew the truth. She wasn't nothing. She was everything. The end.